Yeah, I can see you now. Okay. Yeah, Bismillah.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عن فاطمة الزهراء عليه السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال: سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت: دخل علي أبي رسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال: السلام عليك يا فاطمة. فقلت: عليك السلام. قال: إني أجد في بدني ضعف. فقلت له: أعيذك بالله يا أبتاه من الضعف. فقال: يا فاطمة ائتيني بالكساء اليماني فغطيني به. فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فغطيته به وسترت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلألأ كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولد الحسن قد أقبل وقال: السلام عليك يا أمه. فقلت: عليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال: يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جد رسول الله. فقلت: نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء. فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء؟ فقال: وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوضي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معه تحت الكساء. ما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولد الحسين قد أقبل وقال: السلام عليك يا أمه. فقلت: عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال لي: يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت: نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا جداه. السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله، فتعلموا لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء. فقالوا: عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهما تحت الكساء. فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال: السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت: عليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال: يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله. فقلت: نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال: السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له: وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسي وخليفتي وصاحب لوائي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت: السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قالوا: عليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ أبي رسول الله بطرف الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال: اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحمتي، لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي، يعلمني ما يعلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربكم والسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم، فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم، وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد.
وقال الله عز وجل: يا ملائكتي ويا سكان السماوات، إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدية ولا قمر منيرا ولا شمس مدية ولا فلك يدور ولا بحر يجري ولا فلك يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء خمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال الأمير جبرائيل: يا ربي ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل: هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة، هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
فقال جبرائيل يا ربي تأذن لي أن أحبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا. فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط الأمين وجبرائيل قال السلام عليك يا رسول الله. يا رسول الله العلي والأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية الإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرض مبنية ولا قمر منيرا ولا الشمس مبنية ولا فلك يدور ولا بحر يجري ولا فلك يسري إلا لعجلكم ومحبتكم. وقد إذن لي أن أدخل معكم، فهل تعلنوا لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم رجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد.
فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي والذين بعثني بالحق من نبيه واصطفاني بالرسالة النجية ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جميع من شيعتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي إذا والله فزنا وفزا شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال النبي الثانية يا علي والذين بعثني بالحق النبي واصطفاني بالرسالة النجية ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جميع من شيعتنا ومحبينا وفيه مهموم إلا وفرج الله همه ولا مغموما إلا وكشف الله غمه ولا طالب حاجة إلا قضى الله حاجته. فقال علي وإذا والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فأزوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. محمد وعلى محمد بعد بلند صلوات.
اللهم صل على
محمد وعلى محمد. मैं गुजारिश करूंगा ब्रदर हामिद रजा भाई से तशरीफ लाएं और आज की इस मजलिस में मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद बाज़ बुलंद सलावत।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद। एक बार फिर से सब अल्लाहुम्मा
सल्ली अला
मुहम्मद। जैसा कि यहाँ में बीबी सकीना की शहादत के उन्हीं की मुनासिबत से सलाम पेश करता हूँ। बिस्मिल्लाह। सकीना बीबी के बैन हरम में महशर उठा रहे सकीना बीबी के बैन हरम में महशर उठा रहे हैं बपा है बेवों का शोर मातम हुसैन मरने को जा रहे सकीना बीबी। कहाँ हो अब्बास ओनो अकबर, कहाँ हो कासिम हसन के दिलबर, कहाँ हो अब्बास ओनो अकबर, कहाँ हो कासिम हसन के दिलबर, सवारी लाओ रकाब थामो, इमाम तुमको बुला रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी सुमो से घोड़े के एक बच्ची लिपट गई बेकरार होकर, सुमो से घोड़े के एक बच्ची लिपट गई बेकरार होकर, बना के बाहों का अपनी झूला हुसैन उसको झुला रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी रबाब के दिल से कोई पूछे कि जिसका बच्चा तो मर चुका है, रबाब के दिल से कोई पूछे कि जिसका बच्चा तो मर चुका है, पड़ा है खेमे में एक झूला, उसे भी जालिम जला रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी बड़ी कयामत का है ये मंजर, जनाब फिजा का इम्तिहान है। बड़ी कयामत का है ये मंजर, जनाब फिजा का इम्तिहान है, बहन से छुप कर हुसैन बेकस लिबास कोना मंगा रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी सकीना बीबी के कान जख्मी, जनाब ज़ैनब की पुश्त जख्मी। सकीना बीबी के कान जख्मी, जनाब ज़ैनब की पुश्त जख्मी। जो एक वारिस है बीबियों का, उसे भी बेड़ी पहना रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी नबी के बेटे कफर के अक़दस कुरान से कम नहीं है नासिर। नबी के बेटे का फर्क अक़दस कुरान से कम नहीं है नासिर। न जाने कैसे हैं ये मुसलमान, कुरान पे खंजर चला रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी के बैन हरम में महशर उठा रहे हैं। बपा है बेवों का शोर मातम, हुसैन मरने को जा रहे हैं। सकीना बीबी सलवात।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मदिन व आलि मुहम्मद।
अल्लाह जज़ाकल्लाह, बहुत खूब, जज़ाकल्लाह मेरे भाई, जज़ाकल्लाह हमेद भाई, माशाल्लाह। अब मैं गुजारिश करूंगा मेरे ब्रादरम हुसैन आबिदी भाई से कि तशरीफ लाएं और आज की इस मजलिस में सलाम पेश करें। पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद पावत से बुलंद सलावत। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद
सलवात। इलैया इलैया या बुनैया इलैया इलैया या बुनैया ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा लाश बेसर से आवाज आई लाश बेसर से आवाज आई तुझको बेटी बुलाता है बाबा ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा उठ रही है कभी गिर रही है अपने बाबा को तू ढूंढती है अब से मख्तर में तन्हा खड़ी है आए कैसी तेरी बेकसी है गोशवारे तेरे छिन गए हैं खून कानों से बहता है ताजा सकीना मेरे पास आजा ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा तुझको मांगा है मैंने खुदा से मेरी नजरों में तू फातिमा है अपनी दादी की तरह तुझे भी आज अजरे रिसालत मिला है तुझको सालिम तमाचे लगा दे गया है यतीमी का पुरसा सकीना मेरे पास आजा ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा गैर पर भी करम लाज़मी है तू करीमों के घर की है बेटी तीर सोए हुए हैं वहाँ पर तू जहाँ कर तलक सो रही थी आज खाली नहीं मेरा सीना आपके बाबा के पहलू में सो जा सकीना मेरे पास आजा ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा सर तो नेज़े पे होगा हमारा बेकफन हम यहीं पर रहेंगे तेरी गुर्बत पे रोते रहेंगे फिर कहाँ पर न जाने मिलेंगे आखिरी रात है करबला में शाम आना है तुझको दुखिया सकीना मेरे पास आजा
ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा। चेहरा हाथों से अपना छुपाया, जब सितमगार नजदीक आया, वो तमाचे तुझे मारता था, कोई तेरी मदद को न आया। वे दरिया न जाना है बेटी, तुझसे शर्मिंदा है तेरा सखा। है सकीना मेरे पास आजा, है सकीना मेरे पास आजा। करबला से तकल्लुम ये बीबी, शाम के कैद खाने में पहुंची। एक शब था क़यामत का मंजर, खाक से वो ये कह कर जो उठी, अलविदा अलविदा कुन बेवालो, मुझको आवाज देते हैं बाबा। ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा, ऐ सकीना मेरे पास आजा। इलैया इलैया या बुनैया, इलैया इलैया या बुनैया। सल्लल्लाहु
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद व जज़ाकल्लाह हुसैन, जज़ाकल्लाह, बहुत खूब माशाअल्लाह। नाज़रीन, इस पहले के मरसी के कुछ बंद पेश करूं। आज के जो बानी मजलिस है मोहतरमा ज़हरा मिर्ज़ा साहिबा, उन्होंने मुझसे उन्हें हुक्म दिया है मुझे कि उनकी वालदा का एक कलाम है जनाब सकीना सलामुल्लाह की, उनके मसाइब के ताल्लुक से। तो एक चार में से दो चार बार उनके मैं पेश करना चाहूँगा, ताकि उनकी वालदा को भी हम आज की इस मजलिस में शरीक कर लें इंशाअल्लाह, और दुआ करते हैं कि परवरदिगार आज की इस मजलिस का हदिया नादेली भाई और ज़हरा मिर्ज़ा साहिबा के तमाम मरहुमीन को पहुँचे, और खुसूसन जो आज की हमारी ये कोशिश है उनकी वालदा मरहुमा की खबर में इंशाअल्लाह उनके लिए सवाब जारिया बन जाए इंशाअल्लाह। और मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद वाज़िकुरान सल्लल्लाहु
बानो सकीना जा बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी, बोली बानो सकीना जा बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी, पैर फैला के कब्र में सोना, गोद के वास्ते न जिद करना, रात पहली है मेरी जान बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी, याद आता है गाल सहलाना, शिमर के खौफ से वो घबराना, तेरा सुनना वो झिड़कियां बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी, माँ के पहलू न तुमको रासाया, माँ का पहलू न तुमको रासाया, याद आता था सीना बाबा का, अब सुलाएंगे बाबा जान बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी, तेरे मातम में सर पटकती है, तेरे गम में वो रोज रोती है, जाए रोशन तेरी कहाँ बीबी, जाए रोशन तेरी कहाँ बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी, बोली बानो सकीना जान बीबी, तेरी मैयत के सदके माँ बीबी। सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद।
नाज़रीन, एक मरतबा और सूरह फातिहा पढ़ के मरहुमा रोशन साहिबा की वो कुछ अल्फाज, इतना खूबसूरत कलाम, खुदा ताला उनको यकीन के दर्जात बुलंद फरमाए और यकीनन ये उनके लिए बेहतरीन तोहफा है, सवाब जारिया है। जब तक ये कलाम पढ़ा जाएगा इंशाअल्लाह उनके हक में सवाब उसका मिलता रहेगा इंशाअल्लाह। फातिहा। कैद खाने में तना तुम है कि हिंद आती है, दुख्तरे फातिमा गैरत से मुई जाती है, रूह गालिब में वो जिंदान में घबराती है, बेहवासी से हर एक बार वो चिल्लाती है, बेहवासी से हर एक बार वो चिल्लाती है, आसमां दूर जमीन सख्त किधर जाऊं मैं, बीबियों में के दुआ मांगो के मर जाऊं, बीबियों मिलके दुआ मांगो के मर जाऊं मैं, क्या करूं क्या न करूं जल्द बताओ लोगों, सदका अकबर का हिकारत से बचाओ लोगों, और करके हो खड़े मुझको छुपाओ लोगों, ये किसी कोश में ले जा के बिठाओ लोगों, या किसी गोशे में ले जा के बिठाओ लोगों, सर खुले हो किसी हुजरे में मुझे बंद करो, हिंद आती है मुझे खाक का पैबंद करो, हिंद आती है मुझे खाक का पैबंद करो, इस तरह हिंद के आने से न घबराऊं मैं, बिनते हैदर हुना क्यों कैद में शर्माऊं मैं, कोई दीवार जो शक हो तो समा जाऊं मैं, सीधे मजाए के मकतल को चली जाऊं मैं, सीधे मजाए के मकतल को चली जाऊं। करबला में न ये जिल्लत है न रुसवाई है, बेरिदा मैं हूँ तो बेगोर मेरा भाई है, बेरिदा मैं तो बेगोर मेरा भाई है। नागहां फिजा ने दिए ले हरम को ये खबर हिंद आती है, बड़े जाओ तो जमुल से इधर बीर के नौर को जार है जुलू के अंदर, सब कनीज़ें तो रिदा ओढ़ी है वो नंगे सर, सब कनीज़ें तो रिदा ओढ़ी है वो नंगे सर। पर सवारी बहुत आहिस्ता रवा होती है, हर कदम हिंद ठहर जाती है और रोती है, हर कदम हिंद ठहर जाती है और रोती है। कहती है कैदियों के शोर बुका ने मारा मुझको इस हाय हुसैना की सदा ने मारा, इनके सरदार को किस अहले जफा ने मारा, क्या वो सैयद ताज से अहले दगा ने मारा, क्या वो सैयद था जिसे अहले दगा ने मारा। एक बिजली सी कलेजे पे मेरे गिरती है, नंगे सर फातिमा आँखों के तले फिरती है, नंगे सर फातिमा आँखों के तले फिरती है। हो गया ज़िब्ह कोई खास बारी लोगों, इंसो जिन हूर मलक करते हैं जारी लोगों, ले चलो सूए नजफ मेरी सवारी लोगों, होगी मुश्किल वहीं आसान हमारी लोगों, होगी मुश्किल वहीं आसान हमारी लोगों। खैर से हैं मेरे आका तो वो सोते होंगे, वरना मरकज में अली बेटे को रोते होंगे, वरना मरकज में अली बेटे को रोते होंगे। लौंडियां थी ज़ाज़नो हाकिम के जुलू में जो रवा, देखती क्या है कि एक शेर है आह में निहा, लंगरो कश्त तना फाकत शोतश न दहा, मुँह पे सेली के नशा पोस्त पे दुर्रों के नशा, मुँह पे सेली के नशा पोस्त पे दुर्रों के नशा। साक़े पे फाक़े से जंजीर में थर्राती है, इस्तेकानों से लरज़ने की सदा आती है, इस्तेकानों से लरज़ने की सदा आती है। सबने मुँह करके सुए हिंद ये की नौहा करी, देखिए शाम के जिंदा में चिरागे सहरी, याद खालिक में जो है खालिक से बेखबरी, क्यों मुसलसल किया ये तो है आदम का सफरी, क्यों मुसलसल किया ये तो है आदम का सफरी, किसने दम बांध किया, किसने दम बंद किया, तौके जफा से इसका सिलसिला मिलता है, कुछ शेर खुदा से इसका सिलसिला मिलता है, कुछ शेर खुदा से इसका। गिर्द आबिद के फिरी हिंद बहाले तगतागीर, रख दिया पांव पसर अपना हटा कर जंजीर, बोले वो कौन है, बोली के कनीज़े शबीर, अस्सलाम रसनो तो वो सलासल के असीर, अस्सलाम रसनो तो सलासल के असीर, है वसीयत कमाल मरने पर तैयार है तू, कुछ कफन के लिए रखता है कि नादर है तू, कुछ कफन के लिए रखता है कि नादार है तू, गम न खा गोर कफन मैं तुझे दूंगी लिल्ला, नंगे सर तेरे जनाजे के चलूंगी हमरा, मरने वाले तेरा क्या नाम है, कब से है तबाह, बोले मौला अभी 40 बरस जीना है, बोले मौला अभी 40 बरस जीना है, नाम बेकस है, नाम बेकस भी है, कैदी भी है, बीमार भी है, हाल ये है कि असीरी भी है, आजाद भी है, हाल ये है कि असीरी भी है, आजाद भी है। हिंद ने पूछा मर्ज क्या है, कहा बेपिदरी, रो के वो बोली दवा क्या है, कहा नौहागिरी, घर को दरियाफ्त किया, कहने लगे दर बदरी, बोली लेता है खबर कौन, कहा बेखबरी, बोली लेता है खबर कौन, कहा बेखबरी, करने का सबब पूछा तो शर्माने लगे, ताजियानों के निशान पोस्ट पर दिखलाने लगे, ताजियानों के नशा पोस्ट पर दिखलाने लगे, कैद खाने में। Respected viewers, as you all know, today's Majlis has been sponsored by Janab Nadeli Sahab and his wife, Mohtarama Zahra Mirza Sahiba. Can you all recite Surah Fatiha for all the marhumins, for your marhumins, and for all the marhumins of Kulla Shahda Millati Jafriya. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Respected viewers, it's a good fortune tonight that we are blessed to have Maulana Sayyid Ali Raza Razi amongst us to recite the Majlis tonight. Despite his busy schedule, he has accepted to recite this Majlis for Zahra Sahiba and for the Marhumin of Zahra Sahiba and Nadili Sahib.
I'd like to humbly request Maulana to please come online now to recite the Majlis. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, Tazibulan Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa Maulana Abil Qasimi Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Wa ala ali baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin al-ma'sumin al-mazlumin. الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد. This time last year, we were, or at least all of you were, in Karbala, and I was on my way to Karbala at the time. And this majlis was recited very close to Arba'in in Karbala in a hotel. And within the space of 1 year, which has gone very fast, today we're in the situation where, for the vast majority of us, we're locked down, unable to travel. And though the visas have opened up yesterday, and though some of our friends have got their visas or are in the process of traveling on Monday and Tuesday, and it's still obtainable on Monday, but the fact is that for the vast majority of us, it's not going to be possible for us to travel for Arba'in of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Two things that come into my mind. The first is that when we began the month of Muharram, I was feeling that how is it possible for us to carry this tasalsul that's been going on for 1400 years? That every single year we've been commemorating Sayyid al-Shuhada. Allah's raziq, and there's a special rizq which comes in the 10 days of Muharram that doesn't come in any of the other months of the year, or any of the other days, or the other hours. And if we're to miss this rizq even for 1 year, this rizq will never come back to us until the Day of Judgment, because every year there's a new rizq. And this rizq gives this community the power to continue. It prevents your enemies from overcoming you despite our fractured communities and our infightings and our bickerings. It gives blessings that are beyond comprehension, and only on the Day of Judgment can we truly realize how valuable this period of mourning is. So naturally, on the 1st of Muharram, when that moon came, which as a teacher of mine would say, that the month of Ramadan, or the moon of the month of Ramadan, doesn't give me as much pleasure as the moon of the 1st of Muharram. Why is that? Because Muharram symbolizes ishq and wilaya. Sayyid al-Shuhada, in and of itself, revives the soul of all of the believers. For the nations that have gone before us, they had a rigorous spiritual practice to be able to feel that wilaya. For our community, even our child can feel it because of Sayyid al-Shuhada. One doesn't always need to go through that kind of spiritual vigor, exercises that those nations before us went through. Imam Hussein is sufficient to elevate each one of us. As you can imagine, there's something that's been happening for 1400 years, which has never stopped, all of a sudden comes to a stop. And if that one domino doesn't fall, then the consequences can be very dire for this community. In fact, it could push the dhuhr back maybe 1,000 years to 2,000 years, not in our lifetime, not in our children's lifetime, and not anywhere in the future. The only one thing that could have changed it is what you were doing. At least I don't know about London, but I know many of the other parts of North America Scotland, made their entire homes, their basements, into a majlis of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And that counteracted or counterbalanced any negativity for us not gathering together. Because the energy that comes when we mourn as a body coming together is very powerful. Even to the way that we sit together. This is why they say that when you come to a majlis of Sayyid al-Shuhada, don't come in one person sit in one corner, one person sits in the other corner, one person sits at the back. This shows this unity. Come together and sit together, even if there's 3 of you. And the reason being is this, that sitting together brings that body of Sayyid al-Shuhada to life. The body of Aza is when we come together collectively. But anyhow, as you saw across the world, people made their homes. Sheets were on the floor. Flags were on the back. And we made our entire home into Aza, into a majlis of Aza, into your Ashur Khanes, into your Aza Khanes, into your Imam Bargas. Every home became that. And the minute that you do that with the intention, look, there's 2 ways of doing Aza. There's one sitting on the sofa that you do listening to a lecture with your earphones in your ears or whilst you're working. That has its reward, but it doesn't have the rizq. Rizq only comes when you make the niyyah and you sit down with adab, and only then does it come. This is why it's important when it comes to majlis adab. And look, that adab is gone now. You know, in the olden days, the elders would teach you, stick your feet out in the middle of the majlis. If you can, do sit on the floor, try sit on the floor. If there's an excuse, then sit on the chair and so forth. All of those things which have no halal or haram to it. But remember, month of Ramadan is about halal or haram. Month of Muharram is about ishq and wilaya. For that, the fiqh is different. For that, adab is different. There's an entire fiqh of ishq that people don't know how to digest yet. Because so far our religion has become peripheral. It's become just black and white. There's something deeper. Tashayyuh has always been a sect or a philosophy which is to do with the batin. Remember one thing. Prophecy, Nabuwa, Rasala is a box, is a body. The ruh of that body is wilaya. The ruh of Islam is tashayyuh. The ruh of Islam is the wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And we as Shias, especially in the 21st century, have forgotten that. We've moved very far away from those things which our elders did. And again, we find youngsters critiquing our elders. Why did they do this? What's that for? Why did they recite this? There's a great philosophy there. Recite it and see what happens. And this is why it gives me pleasure when I hear a marsiya, which I know how valuable, who wrote it, how old it is. Or for example, when you see a particular style, we have to carry this forward. And this is important. So now coming forward, Arba'in is coming. What does Arba'in symbolize? Arba'in has its own rizq as well. And Arba'in is very special because in the last 20 years, it's revived Shiism, otherwise Shiism would have perished. You just have to look at our own communities to see the problems which are there, to know had it not been for Arba'in and the culture, the farhang, thaqafa of Arba'in, our communities would have been destroyed. It's because when you look towards Karbala in the last 10 years or so, and I remember in 2014, 90% of every Shia in Scandinavia was in Arba'in. That's how you revive a community. And when you speak to, and if you look at it and see the vast majority of our mosques were empty last year. From 10 days, we went to 5 days, we went to 1 day. Places in the United States, which were doing 10 days, were only doing 1 day, and that was a day of Arba'in, because 60 to 70% of their congregants were in Iraq. What did that do? The big issue for us, our community, was in North America, in Europe, in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, the fitna and fasad that was spreading, and that is spreading. But we find that the vast majority of our youth are going there, and it so coincided with your winter holidays, your half terms, coming into summer. The fact is there was such a movement of people that it revived the hearts of the people. It saved us, and that's the risk. Risk of Arba'in is that it brings unity to our communities. And when unity is there, it gives us hope for the coming of that Imam. This is what Arba'in symbolizes. And look at the brotherhood, look at the sisterhood when you go there. People who can't even walk on a daily basis over here are walking 80 kilometers. People whose feet and knees and arms and everything else hurt just walking down the road are there walking for 2.5, 3 days. People who are stingy by nature are giving for the sake of Sayyid al-Shuhada. It changes your entire nature, and that's what Arba'in symbolizes. So look, today we're here, and we're coming together. And there's a reason behind this as well. Because the reason is this, that we have to mentally, if we can't get there, we have to mentally get into the mind frame of this, to take us away from our daily illusions that cloud our judgment. You know, look, within spirituality, they say the best way or the only real way of removing the clouds, hijab, which surround our hearts and our minds that we can't actually see properly. Look, we get infested in our day-to-day life so much so that we don't understand the truth. Why? Because our mind is always on how we're going to earn, what are we going to do, my children, my family, my grandchildren, and that's not a bad thing. The problem is this, though, that we're focusing on things which are finite. It needs to be such that you look at the destination. How does one in spirituality teach or train your mind to be able to do that? It's muraqibah, but not everybody can do muraqibah. And again, muraqibah is of 3 different levels. Muraqibah, which is for tawheed af'ali, whereby you do muraqibah on the tawheed af'ali or the af'al of Allah. And look, most of you probably haven't even heard of muraqibah, but I just want to touch it and go on. It's not my topic that I want to raise. There's muraqibah sifati, which you do muraqibah on the sifat of Allah. Muraqibah dhati, that you become fani fillah, and then after that, baqa billah. So your entire wujud becomes such. Your entire wujud becomes one with the wujud, the body of wilaya, and you get connected to Insani Kamil, who is the 12th Imam, and the Ahlul Bayt, that you're always under the shadow of the Ahlul Bayt. But look, if I was to go into this, it's a complex discussion which the vast majority of you may not understand because it needs a muqaddamah, it needs an introduction. That through the process of these 3 stages of maraqibah, how a person gets to the level of fani fillah, baqa billah, and then after that becomes one with the body of the Imam, becomes one, not physically, but spiritually, isn't connected to the Imam. This is why there's traditions that say that there are multiple people on earth today who are connected to that Imam. When one dies, another one is replaced. So a story comes into mind, and that is this. And this is a story that Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani gives. You know, what day he mentioned, he said, look, you know, there's a lutf of the Imam which is on us, which we can't understand, right? Yes, this is for the Urafa Muraqibah, but the fastest method for the layman, a person who doesn't have time to go into the intricacies of spirituality, say the Shuhada, and you'll see in a minute. Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani says, look, you know, in World War II, when the Great War was happening, he says, look, Iran wasn't physically taking part in this war, but there was a war which was brewing in Iran in and of itself because of 2 warring powers. You had the Russians who were there, the Germans who were there, the English who were there. And he said in Mashhad that there was a doctor at the time, and the doctor's name was this guy called Sheikh Hassan Khan. Now, this is the Iran of those days whereby you had cross-migration between India and Iran. And again, there was no Pakistan there. So at the time, the best place for medicine was Bombay, as you all know, in the whole world, up to World War II. It's only after the independence, actually, that the subcontinent decreases in terms of everything. But prior to that, as one nation, even in the time of the British, India was very famous for many things. One of them was medicine. So many doctors would go over, Muslim doctors, to Iran. So here this Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani says, he says, I've met Sheikh Hassan Khan, because as you know, Ayatollah Wahid is over 100 at this moment in time. So he says that Sheikh Hassan Khan gave me a story. He said a young man came, and the young man was wounded. He'd been shot, and it was a very bad time for Iran. So he comes, and he comes into a clinic. So it didn't come into the hospital, he came to the clinic. And he says, the Sheikh Hassan Khan was there, and he said, how can we help you? You're bleeding, you need to go to a hospital. He says, look, you're going to have to operate on me now. He said, but look, I don't have the correct equipment. It's going to hurt you. It's going to be very painful for you. He says, it makes no difference to me. Operate on me. He says, fine, are you sure? He says, yes, we're sure. So he looks up, the doctor looks up, and he says, I could see the conviction on this young man's face. He says, come lie down. Get yourself ready, whatever you have to do, get yourself ready, because I'm going to operate on you, and it's going to hurt you, because I'm going to have to go deep inside to take out the bullet. So he says to me, Atullah Wahid is saying, he says, this young man lies down. And when he lies down, he says that he begins to recite something. And when he begins to recite this particular dua, he says he goes into a trance. When he goes into this trance, he says that it was better than a person who's actually been given oxygen to be passed out as they put the injection in. So he says it was better than that. And this is why, if you remember, with Allama Tabatabai as well, when he went to Manchester in the 70s, Shaykh Mutahiri and Allama both came to Manchester. He had a problem with his eye, so they had to remove a cataract. So he asked the question, doctors asked, they said, look, can we put you to sleep? He says, no, operate on me like this. He says, but it's going to hurt, it's the eye. He said, no, when I start doing dhikr, operate on me. So he started doing dhikr, they operated. And he was continuing to do dhikr, and then after that they said to Allama, we finished. When he stopped doing dhikr, he started to scream. He says, it's hurting me. So he started doing dhikr again. Showing how these are some of the stories of the Arifin, but this young man, he starts reciting. And what was he reciting? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah al-Nur. Bismillah al-Nur al-Nur. Bismillah al-Nur ala Nur, etc. Begins to recite. That dua which is mansoob to Fatima alayhi salam. As he begins to recite this, the doctor says, I know this person's special. The dua that he's reciting, the hal that he's going in, and the fact that I'm now operating without him even making a noise. This young man had said, once you've finished, you've stitched me up, then just shake me. Once he finishes, he shakes him and he asks him a question. He says, I want to know something. He goes, for God's sake, you're not a normal person. You must have contact with the Imam. The person says, look, I'm just a normal person. He says, look, let's forget any form of formality. Tell me, are you in contact or not? And at that moment he replied, he says, yes, I'm in contact. There are certain people in the world, similarly in Judaism as well, by the way. There are 36 people in Judaism in the world that they say that the entire universe rests on. The final of the 36 being the Mashiach, who we would call the Mahdi. Similarly, in any given time, one tradition says 360. Now, each one of, whether it's 36 or 360, each of them represents the trajectory within astrology. And this is why they're known as Rijal al-Ghaib. But anyhow, without going deeper into the concept of Rijal al-Ghaib, those hidden people, this young man says that, look, I am in contact with the Imam. So he asks him a question. He says, can you ask the Imam when this war is going to end? He says, look, you don't need to worry about this war. Imam is taking care of you. He says, why? How? He says, there's one thing about you that the Imam likes. He says, what is that? Now, when we say you, it means Iran at the time, which was being occupied for the purposes of a proxy war. He says, there's one thing. He says, what is that one thing? He said, that one thing is the fact that you commemorate Azab Hussein. You remember Sayyid al-Shuhada. That is enough to remove Bala, and that is enough for your Najat. And this is why we say that don't ever take this small or lightly, especially in these nights which are leading to Arbain, when you can't be there. In Karbala, the most important thing is make your homes now for the next 5 nights or 6 nights or 7 nights. If Tawfiq is there, you're going to be in Karbala. From all of those people who are listening, I can guarantee you there's going to be one of you who on Thursday is going to be in Karbala. one of you is going to be there. And that's a very big iddia to make, especially when I don't know who's online. But from all of you, there's one person who's going to be there. This is what it represents. If the niyyah is there, if the intention is there, Hussein ibn Ali is going to call you. And it's him who's going to protect you. And it's him who's going to help you come back. Remember, this never even stopped in the time of Mansur al-Dawaniki when people's heads were being chopped off. And this didn't stop in Mutawakkil al-Abbasi. There are certain sharait. For Hajj, one of them is to save your life. Here for Sayyid al-Shuhada, it's flipped. When your life is in danger, then you got to save the Shuhada. Not saying that all of you end up going. The fact is, you look at yourself, look at your health, other things like that. But remember, everybody has a duty. Karbala, in and of itself, people have duties. You know, I remember on one night before Muharram, Mir Hassan Mir messaged me to say my visa's been stamped and I'm going to Karbala. And I said to him, look, there's a duty that you have to fulfill. And for those people who've been, the entire Urdu Naha scene is upheld by Mir Hassan Mir. Imam Hussein picked him to go. Sometimes Imam Hussein's given some of his khuddama there. Some people he's appointed. And when they go, they're replaced. Even in this world, people have been appointed for certain jobs, for certain responsibilities. And this is their irfan. This is their ma'rifah. This is their dhikr. This is their Allah Allah. This is their mustahabat. Everything there is, khidmah of the zawar of Hussein and the azadar of Hussein. There's no bigger arif in ghaybat kubra than somebody like Sayyid Ali Qadi Marhum, whose students are the likes of Ayatollah Khoi and Ayatollah Bahjat and Abdul Karim Kashmiri and others. Ayatollah Khoi says, he says, when I would go on a Thursday night to the Majlis of Sayyid Ali Qadi Marhum, I would hold my shoes under my armpits because I knew that this old man, who in his old age, when he was 80, he couldn't walk, but he would get up and he would lean down and he would polish all of the shoes of the Azada, as you see today when you go into Karbala. When somebody comes to your house for a Majlis, when you organize a Majlis, or even when you go to the mosque, remember this Arif al-Buzurg, this Arif who's Arif Billah, who he himself says, I drank from the water of Wilaya when others were just looking at it. This man himself says, there are two things that I've never stopped doing. First thing is this, feeding the Azadar of Hussein. He would give him a cup of tea. He was a poor man, he wasn't rich, he would give him a cup of tea. Second thing he would do is polish the shoes of the Azadar of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the Zawar of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Think about it. A man who could summon those people, said Hassan Masqati says, vast majority of you are from Hyderabad who are listening. If you go to the graveyard, the very famous graveyard, said Hassan Masqati Isfahani is buried there, great Arif student of Sayyid Ali Qadi Marhum. He himself says, he says, one day I came to Sayyid Ali Qadi Marhum and I asked him a question. I said, Allah, tell me, this Suleiman's throne which used to float in the sky, was that living or was that not living? So he says, look, I don't know, but I can take you to a place where there's a particular creature from the time of Suleiman. Said Hassan Masqati says, we went onto the road, he grabbed my hand, we took 2 steps and we ended up in a desert. He said that when I went to that desert, he said, look, you stay here, I'm going to go up on that mountain. When I go there, I'll come back with the answer. Hassan Masqati says, when I saw him go, a creature comes out, whispers something into his ear. Qadi comes back down again. Said Hassan Masqati says, Allah created a creature only for Suleiman, that after he died, Allah took it back up again. So look, a man like that, or a man with insight like that, does 2 things. 1, cleans the shoes of the Azadar. Secondly, he feeds them. This is why you've seen even now, many of our people don't even know why they're doing it, but it's tawfiq. Many of the majalis which are going on online, the people who are delivering, even if it's a chocolate bar, even if it's some kebab or whatever it is, they're delivering it to other people's houses, and they may not know that the great Urafa have done this. But know something, in and of itself, this is a riyada that raises your maqam. When you start giving in the way of Imam Hussein, believe me, whatever you have which is priceless, you give for Imam Hussein, right? You yourself know what the Nizams gave, even though some people would say that they weren't even Shia, well, mother was Shia, but they gave what they had for Imam Hussein. This is how dynasties remain. Today, when even if you look at India, and you look at some of the great people who are still remaining, family after family, it's because of the fact that they've given something for the Azaf Sayyid al-Shuhada. And you stay alive. That's the main thing when you're connected to this. So anyhow, coming back to what I was going to say, I'm not going to elongate the discussion too much. It's already late and most of you must be tired by now. One thing I will say here is this, look, that person was reciting a dua. I mentioned it in passing. I want you to remember what this dua is and what the necessity of this dua is. Look, Ibn al-Ta'us also mentioned something very precious. You know, Ibn al-Ta'us himself says that, write this dua in Noor on my coffin. Why is that? This dua, according to a tradition, says that 10 days after Rasulullah's death, Zahra alayhi salam was very grieved, she was crying. Time comes when Salman comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen's door. And Amir al-Mu'mineen says, look, Salman, have you forgotten us as well? He says, no, Mawla, I was grieving, I was in pain. He says, Zahra misses you. She wants to talk to you. So this is Salman goes running. When Salman gets there, there's a curtain there. One side is Salman, one side is this great lady. She says, Salman, I have a gift for you. So he gets excited. Salman himself says, she gave me a gift, something to eat, which was like a date. But it was whiter than ice. And the noor was more shinier than the sun. And the smell was beautiful like musk. Now that's his description. But she says to him, take it and do iftar on this. When you get home, when you break your fast, eat this. Know this has come from one of the houris of heaven. And then she says, there's a person who's made for each one of you, Salman, Abu Dhar, Miqdad, Ammar, from the heavens. And each one of them came to me to console me. When that one who was made for you, Salman, came, she gave me this to give to you. So he takes it and he hides it and he goes home, and people were stopping him because they could smell that beautiful smell there. Anyhow, one tradition says when he eats it, there's no stone in it. So he comes back again to Zahra the next day and he says, look, there was no stone in this. And she smiles. And she begins to tell him secrets. Because remember, that which he took actually made his state of being worthy enough of taking these prayers of Zahra. In the same way as Rasulullah has to go on Mi'raj, right? When he goes into Mi'raj, after that, his state is such that when those archangels, when they come down, Mikael, Israfil, Israel, Jibrail, for example, Israfil never comes onto this earth. One tradition says the king of all the Malaika is Israfil. He blew the trumpets for the beginning of creation, he'll blow it at the end. Never comes. The only time he came was for Rasulullah. Why? And only one time. All of them came to deliver a fruit from the heavens. And that fruit was for Rasulullah to have, to transfer that nur, and that nur that made Zahra from Alam Nur to Alam Madda. So here you find a prophet's batin is being prepared. And that prophet is Khatam al-Anbiya. That prophet is the greatest prophet of all of creation. That prophet is Insani Kamil, Sadr Awwal, cause of creation. But that prophet is being prepared by fruit from the sky. And so same way, Shaykh al-Awliya Salman, outside of Ahlul Bayt, the highest maqam that has ever been achieved by anyone, Salman. Who's giving him the rizq now? Zahra. Therefore, what does it mean? Therefore, something has to come from the heaven to prepare his wujud to be able to take this. And that dua is given, where really the tradition says that Zahra says to Salman, if you recite this morning and evening, you will never be sick. Ibn Taus says that when natural disasters, for example, COVID-19, if a person recites this dua alleviates bala from coming down. And look, there's multiple fadail of this dua that I don't have time to go into because I've got about 3 or 4 minutes to really consolidate. It cleans all of your sins, it says. And it's not just morning and evening. The Urafa, the Amilin, they take out zakat for this. There's particular amounts of time they recite it. It's a very small dua. But the fact is, when you become amil of this, then what happens? Then your entire wujud becomes nurani. As some of the Urafa have had. The eyes become so light. You see the light shining from their eyes, that the power of these eyes when they light is more lighter than the sun. And that's no exaggeration. If you were alive and there in the time of Ayatollah Bahjat, you would see that at Dhuhr time, if the sun was above, his eyes were more brighter than that, likes of Kashmiri. For Farsi, they call it Chishme Barkhi, something that the Urafa use. But that symbolizes that the person's wujud has become nurani. From the wujud, it's become nur. And when you're nur and your wujud is nur, therefore you've come into the fold of wilaya. This dua is sufficient for a person if they recite to increase their nur al-batin. It protects them from sin. What does it mean? Does it mean it makes you ma'asum? No, it means Allah gives you the tawfiq to be protected from sin. Wakens your consciousness up. So look, it's always difficult not to go into a detailed discussion. And because we only have one session, and because it's one annual majlis, it's very difficult to go into more detail than that. But the only thing I'll say, and maybe in the next 2-3 minutes, consolidate quickly, 2 things really is this. Take this time leading up to Arba'ina, Sayyid al-Shuhada, as if these are the last moments of your life. Because when you have that feeling, you'll find your connection with Sayyid al-Shuhada increases. Look, you may be sitting here, but your soul can be next to the zari of the Imam. Only if you utilize even 3 nights now to prepare your soul. And sometimes, you know what distracts your soul? Loose talk, vain talk, loose actions. Sometimes you just want to be on your own in silence, because silence is the best way of maintaining your hal. Remember, much of it is to do with your wujud, state of being. Even the Prophet's hal's changed. Hal is a state of being. Even prophets. In Sani Kamil, you find hal changes. Certain times of the day, hal increases. Ilm increases. As Surah Kafi says, on a Thursday, the ilm of the Imam increases. Why? Because his soul, his ruh, is reunited with the ruh of the 13 infallibles. And then they together, all of them go to the arsh of Allah and they gain knowledge, because the arsh symbolizes ilm and qudra of Allah. Look, I've opened up a lot of chapters and I think that's sufficient for today's discussion. As I said, 2 things. So that was one thing. The second thing is this. Ponder over at least one dua of Ahlul Bayt, whether it's Joshin as Saghir. And I'm saying this for a reason, not just for the sake of saying it. Or is Dua Noor, or is Dua Tawassul. Ponder over it focus on it, you'll see not only does your hal change, but your understanding and your comprehension of the haqaiq, of reality, will begin to expand. And when that happens, you'll find hilm, sabr, akhlaq, everything begins to evolve. And why this is important? Hilm, sabr, akhlaq, and a lack of arguing are 4 qualities that are found in a person whose deen is kamil. And that's what we're working for. And when I say this, I'm not just saying it to you, actually. I'm actually the most important reason is I'm saying it to myself. And when I say this, it's not just an advice to you. I'm actually preaching to myself because I realize time is short and the destination is long. Samir al-Mu'minin will say, min qillat al-zat, wa ba'd al-safar, wa washat al-tariq. This pathway is a pathway which has many hurdles, this life, pathway of life. And time is short. And so therefore, whatever time we have, if you spend it on meditating over these haqaiq, dua tawassul, joshin as-saghir, dua Noor, you'll see that your connection, your state of being changes. See, look, the main purpose of us gathering here last year, if you remember, I guess one of the advantages of being here now is at least we're talking about certain things. Whereas in Karbala, the only thing you want to do is cry. The only thing you want to do is recite Masaib. That's important as well. There is no better thing that I've come across in my life to accelerate your pathway towards Allah, liqa Allah, than Masaib of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Something that breaks a human being completely when they cry for Hussein. Look, I'm going to give you a story. I give this story because Arba'in is coming. One of the Shia of the Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, one of his Shia, came to him and said to him, it would be an honor for me if you could come to the wedding of my son. So he replied, he said, look, after Karbala, I don't go to weddings anymore. If you saw what happened to Ali Akbar, you wouldn't go to a wedding anymore. If you saw how that gharib father was, you wouldn't go to weddings anymore. Here he is coming to the Imam, not realizing what pain the Imam has. So the Shia insisted and insisted. So the Imam says, okay, for you I'll come. Remember, the Imam is Kareem to his Shias, Rauf. Imam is Rauf, Kareem to his Shias. He'll hide his pain, but he'll make sure he removes your pain. Honestly, Imam al-Zaman is madloom because none of his Shias have understood him. They don't understand that he hides his own pain for your pain, and you don't even know it. This is how gharib Imam is. Ghurba of Imam is such, you don't know that Imam is increasing his pain so that your pain can be masked. You think when an azadar comes, do you feel lonely in the majlis of Imam Hussein? You don't feel lonely. You can feel lonely outside. When you come to the majlis of Imam Hussein, he alleviates your loneliness for that 45 minutes to an hour. And when you call upon the Imam helps you. Ghareeb is that Imam. Honestly, I don't know of a lonelier person than the Imam of your time, who is there to alleviate your pain. And you don't even know that he's alleviating your pain. That's how ghareeb a person is. You know, it's one thing when you know, and it's one thing you don't even have a clue that we go about our daily life not realizing that person who keeps on lifting us up when we're down is your Imam. And he takes that burden on himself. So the Imam says, okay, I'll come. No problem. He came. He says on one condition. He says, what is that condition? He says, you recite the Masab al-Akbar. He says, fine. They come and they begin to recite the Masab al-Akbar. People begin to cry. Imam looks up and he says, maybe somebody feels embarrassed to cry here. Let's close these lights, switch off these lights. Switch them off. All those candles that you have, turn the candles off. Let people cry. They say when the candles were put off, crying, people began to cry. When they finished, so to speak, the lights went back on. People are looking around. They look in one direction, they look at the other direction. Who can they not see? Imam Sajjad is missing. So looking around, one person notices he was standing next to the door. Somebody asked him, they said, why are you standing next to the door for? You know what he replied? He said, when I came, I was your guest. Now that you've recited the Masaib of my brother and my father, you're now my guest. For you who are listening today, believe that you're the guest of the Imam. Very small thing I'm going to recite, and that's it. They say when a Shamil Ghariba came, you've heard the story. It's in front of you. It says when Shamil Ghariba came, so the women were scattered across Maqtal in such a way. They say like when a tasbih breaks and the beads are scattered. Fatima Kubra says, Imam Hussein's older daughter, says that I was in the Maqtal, I was moving in a particular direction. She says a man came from behind me and he hit me on the back of the head that I fell onto the ground. She says when I gained consciousness, my head was in the lap of Sayyidah Zainab. When I looked up at her, I asked her a question. I said, where's your chadar? Where's your hijab gone? Where's my hijab gone? You can imagine this. In this maqtal, tradition says there was a small girl. When the hukum was given to all of the women to take off their jewelry, all of the women took off their jewelry, but a 4-year-old girl. When Shimar was asked by Mukhtar, he says, what are the things that you did? He says, one of them was this. He says, when all of the jewelry was taken off, I saw this small girl, her hands were fumbling on her ears. So then I went and I grabbed her earrings, and when I pulled her earrings, she looks towards me, she says, oh person, had you given me some time, I would have gone to my mother. I've never taken my earrings off myself. Say that when her ears were then bleeding, blood was coming out. She was running in the maqtal. Tradition says that she was lost in the maqtal. Rubab was looking for her daughter. Sayyidah Zainab says, why don't you sit down, let me go and look for her. So that when she goes to look for her, She's calling. No reply is coming. Eventually a time comes. From a cut head, a voice comes. Says, Zainab, lower your voice. My daughter's just gone to sleep. What does she see? Sees a man on a body of arrows and a girl lying on his chest. When she lifts the small girl, she asks, she said, from all of these bodies, how did you recognize your father? She replies, she says, when my earrings were ripped and my clothes were burning, Ayatollah Amini and others have said that Rasulullah himself listened to this qasida once of one alim. When he recited this, he came in his dream, he says, recite this for me. He says that Rasulullah saying recite it is tasdeeq in and of itself that is correct. What qasida was he reciting, or what poetry was he reciting? What marsiya was he reciting? He was reciting this. He was saying Sakina's face was small, the enemy's hand was big. When the enemy slapped Sakina on the face, not just one side, but the other side was also bruised. Her entire eyes and face was bruised. It says that in this state, as she was running on the maqtal, from a cut body, a voice comes. Ilayya, ilayya, ya bunayya. She says, that's how I recognize my father. So she went running to her father. With her small hands, she plucked the arrows from his chest. So one more time she could put her head on the chest of her father. Imagine this. Look, final thing is this. I was asked to recite something on Bibi Sakina. I'm going to recite that which is written in the Ziyarat Nama when you go to Sham. When the head of Imam Hussein, for the final time, comes into the jail, Imam Zain al-Abidin takes the head, he puts it on the chest of this 4-year-old girl, who then replies and she says, Father, look at Nasib. Yesterday you would be sleeping, I was sleeping on your chest. Today, Father, you're sleeping on my chest. Then she continues and she says, and this is enough for a person if you think about it. She continues and she says, Father, forgive me that I stutter. When Shimmer slapped me on Shamer Ghariba, it was so hard that since then my speech has become impaired. She puts her hand under the bed of her father. She says, my Gharib father, my Madloom father, why don't you open your eyes, Father, and tell me, those earrings that you gave me on either day, Father, who took those earrings away? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. May Allah accept our worship and forgive our sins, elevate the maqamat of the marhumin, all of you marhumin, especially our sponsor. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tahirin. Matam Hussein.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. ये नींद खाक पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद खाक पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद खाक पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी, इधर जो ख्वाब में आए मचल गई बच्ची, फिजाएं क़ैद हरम की
रुका से हिलने लगी, लिपट के बाप के सर से जो मर गई बेटी, लिपट के बाप के सर से जो मर गई बेटी, तो कैद खाने में बानो कि ये पुकार गूंजी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, फसाने गमे फुरखत सुनाओ बाबा को, दुआ जो बाद शहादत सुनाओ बाबा को, सफर की सारी मुसीबत सुनाओ बाबा को, सफर की सारी मुसीबत सुनाओ बाबा को, लिपट के बाबा से खामोश मत रहो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, बहुत गिला था सकीना तुम्हें अंधेरे का, ये रंज था कहतारी कैद में खुनबा, ये रहा कोई चेहरा नजर नहीं आता, ये गम रहा कोई चेहरा नजर नहीं आता, हमारे गम ज़दा चेहरों को देख लो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, जो ऐसे हाल में देखे खफा न हो बाबा, जरा मैं साफ तो कर लूं ये खून कानों का, पहने जाओ सकीना फटा हुआ कुर्ता, न पहने जाओ सकीना फटा हुआ कुर्ता, लहू में डूबी ये जुल्फे संवार लो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, दुखी दिलों की तसल्ली तुम्हारी बातें थी, दिलों के ज़ख्म का मरहम तुम्हारी बातें थी, हमारे गम का सहारा तुम्हारी बातें थी, हमारे गम का सहारा तुम्हारी बातें थी, हमारे गम का सहारा न छीन लो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी उठो उठो बीबी, मैं क़द्रगाह में असग़र तो आई हूँ खोकर, सुहाग जल गया वारिस नहीं रहा नहीं कोई दिल पर गरीब माँ का सहारा, नहीं कोई दिल पर। तुम इस तरह मुझे तन्हा न छोड़ दो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद ख्वाब पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी। खुले हुए दर जिंदा है, खत्म रंजो महन, तमाम कुल्बे के हाथों से खुल गई है रसन। कहाँ गया मेरी बच्ची तुम्हारा शौक वतन, कहाँ गया मेरी बच्ची तुम्हारा शौक वतन। रिहाई मिल गई जिंदा से, घर चलो बीबी, ये नींद खाक पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी, ये नींद खाक पे कैसी, उठो उठो बीबी। या हुसैन, या हुसैन, बिस्मिल्लाह, या हुसैन, या हुसैन।
ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। नामारी से नाजों से इसे शबीर ने पाला है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। सज्जाद की बहना को, गाजी की भतीजी को, मांगा है कनीजी में, उस फूल सी बच्ची को, उस फूल सी बच्ची को, शहने अपने सजदों में जिसे, शहने अपने सजदों में जिसे अल्लाह से मांगा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। दौड़ेंगे अगर ना पे किस तरह से संभलेगी, गर राह में गिर जाए आवाज किसे देगी, आवाज किसे देगी। पुश्ते नाखा पर क्यों तन्हा, पुश्ते नाखा पर क्यों तन्हा, रस्सी से बांधा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। क्या जुर्म किया इसने, क्यों इसको रुलाता है, दिखला के से पानी मट्टी पे बहाता है, मट्टी पे बहाता है। क्या तेरी कोई औलाद नहीं, क्या तेरी कोई औलाद नहीं, क्यों जुल्म ये ढाता है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। रोने न दिया इसको बाबा के लाश पर, है नील तमाचों के मासूम के चेहरे पर, मासूम के चेहरे पर। अल्लाह जाने ये इस पे सितम, अल्लाह जाने ये इस पे सितम किस बात का बदला है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। हाँ एक रात सरे जिंदा शबीर का सर आया, सर लेकर गोदी में बच्ची ने किया नोहा, बच्ची ने किया नोहा। आंखें खोलो बाबा देखो, आंखें खोलो बाबा देखो, ये कौन ज़ईफ़ा है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। मासूम की गर्दन में बांधी है रसन ऐसे, घुट जाएगा दम इसका, मैं तेज चलूं कैसे, मैं तेज चलूं कैसे। ये कहता हुआ बीमार मेरा, ये कहता हुआ बीमार मेरा, खम होकर चलता है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा, ये छोटी जहरा है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। तुरबत पे सकीना की आबिद ने कहा होगा, ये मेरी अमानत है, रखना तू ख्याल इसका, रखना तू ख्याल इसका। बाबा भी नहीं अम्मू भी नहीं, बाबा भी नहीं अम्मू भी नहीं, बेआस यतीमा है। मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। कुछ रहम तो खा ये छोटी ज़हरा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। रोज़े पे नजर जब भी ऐशाद मचाती है, फिर क़ल्ब तकल्लुम को ये बात रुलाती है, ये बात रुलाती है। सदियाँ गुजरी छोटी बीबी, सदियाँ गुजरी छोटी बीबी, जिंदा में क्यों तन्हा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। ऐ शिमर जरा कुछ रहम तो खा ये छोटी ज़हरा है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। नामार से नाज़ों से इसे शबीर ने पाला है, मासूम सकीना है, मासूम सकीना है। सही
या इमाम मुतवज्जिह ज़ियारत। अस्सलाम वालेकुम या अब्बास, अस्सलाम वालेकुम या इब्न रसूलुल्लाह, अस्सलाम वालेकुम या इब्न अमीरुल मोमिनीन सय्यदुल वसीन, अस्सलाम वालेकुम या इब्न फातिमतुज़ ज़हरा सय्यदतुन निसाइल आलमीन, अस्सलाम वालेकुम या जमीअन शुहदाए करबला खुसूसन अबुल फज़ल अब्बास इब्न अमीरुल मोमिनीन, अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू। अस्सलाम वालेकुम या मौला या गरीबल गुरबा या मुइनुज़ ज़ुफ़ा वल फ़ख़रा बियौम जज़ा सुल्तान या अबुल हसन अली इब्न मूसी रज़ा राज़ी बिल क़द्र वल क़ज़ा। अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू। अस्सलाम वालेकुम या साहिब अस्र ज़मान अलमान 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 मिन फितनतिज़ ज़मान। अस्सलाम वालेकुम या शरीकल कुरान, अस्सलाम वालेकुम या इमाम अल-इंस वल जान। अजल्लाहु ताला फरजक व सहलल्लाहु ताला मखरजक व ज़हूरक व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अल्लाहुम्मा कुल्ल वलियकल हुज्जत इब्नुल
हसन सलवातुका अलैहि वला बाए फी हाज़िही साती वफ़ी कुल्ले साहा वलियन व हाफ़िज़ान व क़ाइदन व नासिरा व दलीलन व ऐना हत्ता तुस्किनहु अर्ज़का तवा फीहा तवीला बिरहमतिका या रहमर राहिमीन।
मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद व जज़ाकल्लाह। नाज़रीन, मैं नादिरी भाई और मोहतरमा ज़हरा मिर्ज़ा साहिबा की जानिब से आप तमाम नाज़रीन का तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहूँगा जो आपने अपने इतने कीमती वक्त में से वक्त निकाल कर आज की इस मजलिस में शिरकत फरमाई। मैं तमाम ज़ाकिरीन का जिन्होंने इसमें शिरकत फरमाई उनका भी तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहूँगा जिन्होंने हमारी दावत कबूल कर आज आके यहाँ पर सोज़ खानी और मस्जिद खानी और खानी का शर्फ हासिल किया। बिलखुसूस मैं मौलाना सैयद अली अब्बास रिज़वी का शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहूँगा कि उन्होंने जो आज इस मजलिस को ज़ीनत बख्शी और आके इतने इरफानी बयान से हमें खिताब फरमाया। और जाने से पहले आप हज़रात से एक मरतबा मैं फिर गुजारिश करूँ कि काफ़ी लोग बीमार हैं और ये जो वबा चल रही है इसमें काफ़ी लोग मुतासिर हुए हैं। परवरदिगार से दुआ है कि बीमार करबला और बीमार मदीना के सदक़े में तमाम बीमारों को शिफाए कामिला इनायत फरमाए। आपसे गुजारिश है कि सब मिलकर अम्मा जी को आयत 5 मरतबा इनायत फरमाइए और ये तमाम मरीजों के हक में शिफायात खराब दी। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد वजल अन्नूर में प्रोग्रामों का सिलसिला इसी तरह चलता रहेगा इंशाल्लाह. Don't forget to log in again on Sunday 11 o'clock. ब्रादर हाशिम के जानिब से सालाना मजलिस का एहतमाम किया गया है. अन्नूर लाइव स्ट्रीम करेगा उस मजलिस को भी. तो आपसे गुजारिश है कि संडे इंशाल्लाह दिन के 11 बजे यूके टाइम आप जरूर इसमें लॉग इन कीजिएगा और उस मजलिस में भी शिरकत जरूर फरमाइएगा. और आखिर में फिर से एक मरतबा तमाम अपने मरहूमीन के लिए और तमाम मिल्लत जाफरिया के मरहूमीन जहाँ जहाँ भी शोहदाए मिल्लत जाफरिया और खुसूसन आज के हमारे जो मजलिस के स्पॉन्सर है नादू भाई और उनकी अहलिया की जानिब से उनके तमाम मरहूमीन के लिए सूरत मुबारकुल फातिहा. बिस्मिल्लाह रहमान रहीम. बिस्मिल्लाह. अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद. चैन दुनिया में मिले राहत उक़बा मिल जाए शिद्दत इश्क मिले गम का सलीखा मिल जाए कासे दिल लिए हाजिर हैं दर दौलत पर फातिमा आपकी औलाद का सदका मिल जाए. अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद. वस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू.